Kate Middleton stood motionless, the crystal lights above her suddenly cold. One sentence from Camilla, sharp enough to cut through centuries of royal restraint, had left her daughter's smile faltering in front of the entire court. In that instant, the future queen's composure cracked, and the palace felt a wrath it had not seen in generations. What happened next would travel far beyond those gilded walls. Join us as we uncover the full story, the night meant for unity. Night had been imagined as nothing less than a portrait of perfection, a gathering meant to display the monarchy's unity, grace, and unshakable poise to the world. For weeks, the palace staff had worked with military precision, from polishing centuries-old silverware until it gleamed like captured moonlight, to arranging fresh blooms in vases so rare that their porcelain alone could have bought a house. Inside, Buckingham Palace's grand ballroom, chandeliers poured golden light over the assembled elite. The air shimmered with soft music from the royal orchestra and the faint scent of roses that had been imported from the Queen's own gardens. Each step echoed on polished marble floors, whispering the weight of history. Every gesture, every smile was a performance in itself, an intricate dance where appearances mattered more than truth. Kate Middleton entered with the quiet confidence of a woman who understood both her role and the eyes fixed upon her. She wore a deep emerald gown, chosen not only for its elegance but for the message it carried: renewal, resilience, and the enduring strength of the crown. At her side was Princess Charlotte, her small hand resting in her mother's, her face alight with curiosity. The little girl wore a pale blue dress, the fabric catching the light with every movement, and on her chest a sapphire brooch that had once belonged to Princess Diana. It was a silent tribute, a reminder that while the faces in the palace may change, its heart remained tethered to the woman who had redefined royalty for a generation. From across the room, Camilla's gaze fell on the pair. The Queen Consort stood in a gown of ivory silk, her posture commanding yet relaxed, as though she were entirely at home in this gilded theater. Her smile was polite, but her eyes told another story, a flicker of something calculated, perhaps even territorial. Those who knew the subtleties of royal life could feel the undercurrent in that look. Admiration mixed with rivalry, a hint of challenge wrapped in civility. The night began as planned. Toasts were made, conversations flowed, and photographers discreetly captured moments designed to travel across the globe as proof of the monarchy's enduring image. But beneath the carefully arranged surface, there was something else, an almost imperceptible shift in the air, the feeling that not everything was as harmonious as it seemed. Kate sensed it the moment she stepped into the room. It was the kind of tension that needed no words to announce itself. She focused instead on Charlotte, who clung to her mother's arm as they navigated clusters of diplomats, celebrities, and aristocrats. Kate knew that in these halls, even a child's smile could become the subject of endless discussion, twisted into meanings it was never meant to hold. And though she didn't yet know it before the night was over, her daughter's smile would become the spark that ignited a storm, and when that storm came, it would leave nothing in the palace untouched. The spark that lit the fire. It happened in a moment so swift, so deceptively small, that at first it seemed almost harmless. The ceremonial toast was moments away, and the guests were gently herded toward the raised platform at the center of the ballroom. Charlotte, curious and bright-eyed, wandered a few steps forward to admire the towering arrangements of white lilies and roses that crowned the display tables. She reached out to touch a petal, her laughter carrying lightly over the hum of conversation. And then, Camilla's voice. "Well," she said, her tone dipped in the sweetness of a practiced joke, "it seems even the little ones can't resist stealing the spotlight before they've earned it." The words floated into the air, but their weight dropped like stone. The nearby guests heard them clearly, and the awkward pause that followed was enough to strip away the ballroom's polished ease. Laughter dimmed, conversation stumbled, and a few heads turned, not toward Charlotte, but toward Kate. The remark had been crafted with skill, plausible as humor to the casual listener, yet unmistakably laced with humiliation. In one sentence, Camilla had publicly framed Charlotte not as a beloved princess, but as a child out of her depth, overstepping before her time. Kate felt her heartbeat quicken. She had long since learned that in the world of royalty, the sharpest, Blades were hidden in words. And this was a blade meant to cut. The sight of her daughter standing frozen, her small smile fading into confusion, tore through her in a way no political maneuver ever could. Her eyes found Camilla's across the space between them. Neither woman blinked. There was no apology. In the Queen Consort's expression, only the faintest upward curl of her lips, a smirk that might have been imperceptible to others, but which Kate read with absolute clarity. This was not an accident. She stepped forward, gathering Charlotte into her arms, her voice a low whisper meant only for her daughter's ears. "It's all right, darling. You've done nothing wrong." The warmth in her tone was for Charlotte, alone, but her gaze never left Camilla's. The music swelled again, but it no longer soothed. Around them, the guests tried to pretend nothing had happened, but the air had changed. The room felt smaller, heavier. The line had been crossed, and Kate knew the moment would not pass quietly, because the storm in her heart was no longer a whisper. It was a roar waiting to be heard. The breaking point. The evening limped on under the weight of what had just transpired. Kate moved through the remainder of the program with flawless public grace, but beneath it, she felt the steady burn of resolve. She would not let this moment be reduced to a footnote. Not when it involved her daughter. Not when it spoke to something far larger than one remark. It was about respect, position, and the message it sent to those who would one day follow in Charlotte's steps. The final portion of the gala was the official portrait session. It was tradition. The royal family gathered for a single, carefully staged image that would become part of the palace archives. The photographer, accustomed to wrangling both royalty and chaos, began arranging the family with well-practiced diplomacy. William and Kate, with their children, were placed in the center, flanked by King Charles and Camilla on one side, and other senior royals on the other. As the arrangement was nearly complete, Camilla stepped forward under the guise of assisting Charlotte. Her hand rested lightly on the girl's shoulder as she shifted her a step to the side, murmuring, "Let's put you somewhere more fitting, dear." It was polite on the surface, but the implication was as sharp as the earlier remark. Charlotte didn't belong in the center. Kate moved instantly. "She is exactly where she belongs," she said, her tone calm but edged with steel. The words carried across the room, cutting through the murmurs and the shuffling of gowns. For the first time that night, the control in her voice matched the fire in her eyes. Camilla stepped back, her smile returning as if nothing had happened. But her gaze lingered, a silent acknowledgement that she had just met a wall she could not easily breach. The camera clicked, immortalizing the frozen moment. But what the photograph would never reveal was the promise Kate had silently made to herself. This would not be forgotten nor forgiven, and her next move would ensure that the palace would never forget it either. The moment Kate chose to act. The photograph was taken, the smiles frozen, the image preserved for history, but beneath the stillness, the air was electric. Kate could feel the weight of what had just occurred pressing on her chest. Every royal event was a stage, and every gesture was a performance meant for an audience far beyond the palace walls. But there were moments, rare, dangerous moments, when that performance slipped and something raw broke through. As the portrait session concluded, the guests began drifting back toward the banquet tables. Crystal glasses refilled, silver cutlery gleamed beneath the soft glow of the chandeliers, and the hum of conversation returned, though it carried an undertone, whispers, half-smiles, and sidelong glances. The remark to Charlotte, the subtle displacement in the portrait, people had noticed. And in a court where gossip was as much a currency as influence, word would spread with astonishing speed. Kate's mind was a quiet storm. She thought of Charlotte's downcast eyes, the confusion etched into her young face. She thought of Diana, how fiercely protective she had been, how willing to push against palace walls when it came to her sons. And she thought of the crown she herself would one day wear, and what it would mean if she allowed such treatment of her children to go unanswered. Camilla stood across the room, deep in conversation with a foreign dignitary, laughter ringing, out at just the right moments. It was the picture of composure, if one didn't know the undercurrents that had been churning all evening. But Kate knew. She could see the subtle way Camilla's eyes scanned the room, always aware of who was watching, who was whispering, who was aligning themselves where. The decision took shape inside Kate with startling clarity. She would not create a scene in the middle of the ballroom. That would be too crude, too easy for her detractors to twist into something unbecoming. But she would act, and when she did, it would be in a way the entire royal circle would understand. The opportunity came sooner than expected. As the king prepared to deliver his closing remarks for the evening, a select few were invited to stand near him on the dais as a symbolic display of unity. Traditionally, this spot was reserved for the most senior royals, the king, the queen consort, and the immediate heir with their spouse. Tonight, that meant Charles, Camilla, William, and Kate. But as the usher approached to lead them forward, Kate made a deliberate choice. She tightened her grip on Charlotte's hand and brought her daughter with her to the dais, positioning her between herself and William. It was a subtle act to some, but to those versed in the choreography of royal life, it was a declaration. Charlotte belonged at the heart of the royal family. The shift in positioning did not go unnoticed. The photographers adjusted, the dignitaries exchanged knowing looks, and Camilla's smile wavered just enough for Kate to see it. The king glanced toward his daughter-in-law, his brow knitting for a fraction of a second before smoothing again. When Charles began to speak, his voice steady and dignified, Kate stood tall, one hand resting protectively on Charlotte's shoulder. She did not look at Camilla, nor did she need to. The message had been delivered, not in words, but in the language of power, presence, and place. It was a masterstroke of quiet defiance. But Kate knew the move would not end the matter. In the royal world, challenges did not dissolve. They grew, evolved, and often came back sharper than before. Tonight she had drawn her line in the sand, and somewhere deep within the palace, Camilla was already plotting how to cross it. Camilla's counterplay. The gala's closing applause still echoed in the vaulted ceilings when the guests began filtering into the smaller reception rooms. The atmosphere had shifted, still polite, still sparkling with jewels and champagne, but underpinned by something sharper. A current of intrigue ran through the palace like a hidden tide, pulling certain conversations into shadowed corners and away from prying ears. Camilla moved among the guests like a seasoned diplomat, her every step measured. She was speaking, more than she had earlier in the evening, leaning in close to foreign ambassadors, laughing softly at private jokes, and weaving her charm into every exchange. To an outsider, it was simply the queen consort playing her role with effortless grace. But Kate knew better. She had seen this before, the careful cultivation of narratives, the subtle seeding of opinions that could sprout into rumors by morning. The queen consort's greatest weapon had never been blunt confrontation. It was suggestion. A raised eyebrow here, a seemingly offhand remark there, small enough to deny, but potent enough to plant doubt. Tonight, Kate could feel those seeds being scattered with precision. She caught fragments as she moved through the room with William and Charlotte, a visiting minister chuckling as Camilla spoke of the challenges of raising children in the public eye. A countess tilting her head in sympathy as Camilla added, "Of course, some mothers find it harder to manage their little ones during official duties." No names were mentioned, but the implications hung in the air like perfume, subtle, cloying, and hard to ignore. Kate kept her composure, every smile carefully measured, every word deliberate. She knew engaging directly would only feed the narrative. Yet it was impossible to ignore the way certain guests began glancing her way, their expressions shifting as if they were trying to reconcile the woman before them with the whispers they'd just heard. William sensed it too. At one point, he leaned in and murmured, "She's working the room." His jaw tightened, the faintest flicker of frustration crossing his face. But in public, the heir to the throne could not storm across the room to confront his stepmother. Neither could his wife. Instead, Kate adjusted her strategy. She began seeking out the same guests Camilla had just spoken to, engaging them in her own conversations, subtly reframing the evening's events without ever mentioning them directly. To the foreign minister, she spoke warmly of how much Charlotte had enjoyed the evening and how important it was for young royals to feel included. To the Countess, she shared a light-hearted story of Charlotte's curiosity and how it mirrored Diana's spirit. Each exchange was another quiet thread in the tapestry she was weaving, one of grace, dignity, and quiet strength. Still, Kate knew this was no longer just about a single evening. Camilla's actions tonight were part of something bigger, a campaign perhaps to reassert her dominance within the palace hierarchy. And in a monarchy where perception could be as decisive as law, such battles were rarely fought in a single skirmish. They were wars of attrition, where the winner was the one who could endure longest without losing face. The night began to wind down, the grand ballroom slowly emptying into polished corridors. But as Kate and William prepared to leave, she caught Camilla watching her from across the room. The Queen Consort's expression was unreadable, save for one small detail. The faint, knowing tilt of her head. It was a gesture that spoke volumes. This wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. And by the time the next move came, it would not be made in the safety of a ballroom. It would be made where the entire world could see. When the world was watching. Barely a week had passed before the two women were once again placed side by side. This time not in the controlled intimacy of a palace ballroom, but under the unblinking gaze of the world's cameras. It was a state event of national significance, one where attendance was not merely expected, but politically necessary. The setting was Westminster Abbey, its ancient stone walls draped in ceremonial banners, its floor lined with dignitaries and foreign leaders. Outside, crowds had gathered in the crisp winter air, their cheers echoing up to the Abbey's soaring towers. Inside, the space glowed with the filtered light of stained glass windows, painting the floor with hues of gold, ruby, and sapphire. Kate arrived with William and their children, her expression serene, her posture impeccable. She wore a tailored coat dress in a rich royal blue, her hat tilted just enough to frame her face for the lenses of the waiting photographers. Behind the calm elegance, however, her mind was a map of the week before. Every word, every glance, every quiet dagger. Camilla's entrance was a study in timing. She arrived moments later, greeted warmly by the king, and then turned her attention to the waiting cameras. In her cream ensemble and diamond brooch, she projected an image of gracious authority. But when her eyes found Kate, the warmth in her smile cooled by a fraction, visible only to the one person who knew what to look for. The seating arrangement had been decided days in advance, yet the subtlety of its symbolism was not lost on anyone in the royal press corps. Kate and Camilla were placed directly beside one another in the front row, separated only by William. The message was clear. The monarchy was united. At least to those who didn't know the undercurrents. The ceremony began with solemnity, the choir's harmonies filling the cavernous space. For a time, the grandeur of the moment pushed aside personal grievances. But in the stillness between prayers, the tension returned, invisible but palpable to those who were close enough to feel it. It was during the hymn that the first shift came. As the congregation stood, Camilla leaned slightly toward the king, her gloved hand brushing his arm as she whispered something too low to catch. The king's brow furrowed, and his gaze drifted toward William and Kate. To the casual observer, it was nothing, a passing comment during a long service. But in the careful choreography of royal events, even a whisper could carry the weight of a headline. Kate's eyes remained fixed ahead, her lips moving with the hymn, but inside she felt the heat of that moment. She had learned long ago that the cameras did not merely record, they interpreted. A glance, a pause, a flicker of expression could be replayed endlessly, analyzed and reframed to fit any narrative. And if Camilla had just set one in motion, Kate knew she would have to counter it without ever breaking the surface calm. Her chance came as the congregation sat again. Leaning slightly toward William, she spoke softly, her hand resting on Charlotte's shoulder. The cameras caught it, the image of a mother engaged warmly with her family, her focus entirely on her role as both parent and future queen. It was a small, deliberate moment, but in the game of optics, it was a move that would outlast any whisper. By the end of the service, the two women had exchanged no direct words, yet the morning had been another battle, fought in body language, glances, and calculated positioning. As they stepped outside into the roar of the waiting crowd, the flashbulbs erupted, freezing the tension in hundreds of frames. Somewhere in that sea of images Kate knew were the seeds of the next chapter, one that might not just live within palace walls, but spill into headlines that could not be controlled. And when it did, the fight between future and present queens would no longer be hidden at all. The storm breaks in the press. The morning after Westminster Abbey, the newspapers did not lead with the grandeur of the service. They led with the photographs. Side by side, splashed across front pages and online headlines, were stills of Kate and Camilla in the front row, two women sitting inches apart, yet a world away in expression. Some images caught the faint tightness around Kate's smile. Others showed Camilla mid-whisper to the king, her gaze flicking toward William and Charlotte. The tabloids pounced. Frost at the front row, one headline blared. Another was less subtle. Queen versus Queen in waiting, palace rift spills into public. Social media lit up with speculation, dissecting every frame as though it were evidence in a trial. Slow-motion clips looped endlessly, with amateur lip readers offering contradictory theories about what Camilla had said. In Kensington Palace, Kate sat at the long oak table in her private study, the morning papers spread before her. She had faced gossip before, whispers of rivalry, fabricated dramas, but this was different. The focus wasn't just on her, it was on Charlotte. The little girl's presence on the dais at the gala had been reinterpreted by commentators as a calculated snub to the Queen Consort. Kate felt a familiar ache in her chest, one she'd known in the days after her own entry into the royal family, when every smile was analyzed, every gesture judged. But this was worse, because it was about her child. William entered quietly, a mug of tea in hand. He skimmed the headlines, his jaw tightening. "They're framing it exactly how she wanted," he said, the words clipped. "Camilla plays the gracious hostess, and you—" He broke off, shaking his head. "You're painted as defiant." Kate's eyes didn't leave the papers. "That's the point," she murmured. "She's playing the long game." By midday, the palace press office issued a statement calling the rumors of discord completely unfounded. But the denial only fueled the fire. Royal watchers debated whether the palace was covering for a deeper feud. Television panels speculated about tensions in the line of succession, while online commentators drew unflattering parallels to the late Princess Diana's strained relationship with the Queen. Behind the scenes, Kate knew she was walking a knife's edge. She could not publicly retaliate. To do so would hand her critics the evidence they craved. But silence could be just as dangerous, allowing the narrative to grow unchecked. That evening, she chose her countermove. Instead of issuing another statement, she arranged a quiet photo opportunity, herself, William, and Charlotte visiting a children's hospital. It was not part of the official schedule, but she knew the cameras would find her, and they did. The images flooded the press by nightfall. Kate kneeling beside a young patient, Charlotte handing over a small bouquet of daisies, William laughing with the staff. The contrast was striking. While Camilla's recent appearances were tied to glittering banquets and political ceremonies, Kate's were now centered on compassion, family, and genuine connection. Without a word, she had shifted the story's focus from conflict to character. Still, she knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Camilla was not a woman to accept a public loss without an answer. And in the palace, where every corridor could carry whispers, Kate could almost feel the Queen Consort's next move taking shape. When it came, it would be bolder, sharper, and aimed straight at the heart of Kate's public image: the retaliation. It came less than a fortnight later, at what should have been one of the Crown's most uplifting events, a charity gala supporting children's education. The cameras were out in force, the guest list glittered with household names, and the mood, at least on the surface, was celebratory. Kate arrived in a pale blush gown, understated yet luminous under the ballroom lights, William at her side. She had chosen the look deliberately, soft, approachable, and in keeping with her recent focus on humanitarian work. In the weeks since Westminster Abbey, her public appearances had been carefully curated to project warmth and stability. It had worked. Public sentiment had begun swinging back in her favor, but Camilla was waiting. The Queen Consort made her entrance late enough to ensure all eyes turned. She wore a sweeping emerald dress, the color unmistakably echoing the gown Kate had worn the night of the gala with Charlotte. Around her neck hung a striking diamond and emerald necklace, a piece known to have belonged to Princess Diana, rarely seen in public since her passing. Gasps whispered through the room. The choice of jewel was bold, provocative even. In royal circles, certain heirlooms carried unspoken ownership through sentiment, if not through law. This particular necklace had once been a gift from the Queen Mother to Diana, worn on some of her most photographed nights. By appearing in it now, and at such a high-profile event, Camilla wasn't just making a fashion statement, she was rewriting the narrative. The photographers swarmed. Headlines would not miss the symbolism. Camilla, the Queen Consort, reclaiming Diana's legacy in the middle of her much-rumored feud with Diana's beloved daughter-in-law. Kate saw it instantly. Her smile never faltered, but inside she felt the deliberate weight of the move. It wasn't subtle. It was a shot fired in full view of the world. And it landed. Within minutes, guests were murmuring, some in admiration, others in disbelief. A few even cast glances toward Kate, as if waiting for a reaction. William noticed too. His hand found hers, the brief squeeze saying more than words could. But Kate's years in the public eye had taught her the value of composure. If Camilla's goal was to provoke, she would not give her the satisfaction. When the speeches began, Kate bided her time. She listened, she applauded, she moved through the room with her usual grace. But when it was her turn to speak, a surprise introduction to announce the evening's largest charitable pledge. She stepped to the podium with a calm that belied the fire in her chest. "Tonight," she said, her voice steady and warm, "we are reminded that legacies are not just worn or displayed, they are lived. Every day, in the work we do and the compassion we show." The words hung in the air, pointed yet unassailable. The audience broke into applause, some faces turning toward Camilla as if to catch her reaction. The Queen Consort merely smiled, the diamonds at her throat catching the light, but her eyes betrayed nothing. The evening ended without confrontation, but the lines had been redrawn. Camilla's gesture had been bold. Kate's response had been measured. Neither woman had lost face, yet neither had yielded ground. As Kate left the gala, cameras flashing all around her, she knew the battle had shifted into a new phase. No longer confined to whispered remarks or subtle seating arrangements, it was now being fought in full view of the public, each move calibrated for maximum impact. And somewhere in the depths of the palace, both women understood the truth. This was no longer just about personal slights or protocol. It was about the shaping of history, and only one would write the final chapter. That chapter, when it came, would shake the monarchy to its core. The Crown's Quiet War. When the palace gates closed that night and the glitter of the cameras faded, the true weight of the evening settled like a shadow over Buckingham. In the public eye, the monarchy had given nothing away. 2 poised women, 2 perfect smiles, and no outward sign of discord. But those who understood the language of the crown knew better. This was no passing tension. It was a slow, deliberate contest for influence, one fought not with titles or decrees, but with symbols, gestures, and moments that would be replayed in the minds of millions. Kate's quiet defiance at the gala with Charlotte. Camilla's whispers in the Abbey. The emerald necklace. Each act was a move on a board where the stakes were not just personal pride, but the image of the monarchy itself for decades to come. Within the palace walls, life would resume its careful rhythm, meetings, engagements, family dinners where the conversation would remain exquisitely polite. But the silences would speak volumes, and the smallest choices, where to stand, what to wear, whom to greet first, would be weighed like pieces of gold. For the public, the truth would remain just out of reach, glimpsed only in flashes. But, for those watching closely, the question was no longer whether there was a war between the future queen and the Queen Consort. It was when and how it would end. And when the final move came, it would not be quiet. It would change the monarchy forever.